Hi, Priya. And it is great to have you as a guest at Tales from the Block. Thank you very much for coming in. And I'm really looking forward hearing all the stories. But before that, please tell the audience a little bit more about you. And, there were some changes with you recently. So share any of that fun stuff.
Fun. Okay. Well, hi, Ralitsa. Thank you for having me. This is such a great opportunity. Well, I'm Priya, well, Priyanka Dyer, but people know me as Priya, and I've been around in the industry for about 15 years, I would say. I still feel that I'm new because you can never stop learning from here. My background really specializes mostly on sort of large and complex schemes, working with developers. I've worked for obviously RMC clients and resident management companies and all of that. But mainly, I'd say my focus has been mainly on large phased complex schemes. And I've worked for companies such as Rendell and Rittner, where I've kind of spent my majority of my career in. Learned and grown there quite a bit. And then I moved to sort of the commercial world a little bit. So companies like CBRE, Daniel Watney, and very recently I've just joined Premier Estates. So Premier Estates is also part of the big Godiva group, under which we now have R&R and Encore and so on. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell in terms of my career.
Amazing, amazing. So tell me about your typical day. What's a day in Priya's world?
Right. So it keeps changing, as we know. It's what a day is never the same as the one before. So most recently, I'd say, well, I've obviously joined Premier. It's only been about 2 weeks, so very fresh. And I'll probably cite a day from there, or should I cite a day from my previous role? They're completely poles apart. So let's talk about one of my days here. I'd say that I start off a little bit before the starting time. We have quite a lot of flexibility. The company bestows upon us a lot of trust, and they hire people that are mature, experienced, so we can manage our time. But I currently manage approximately 5 large and complex Barclay schemes at Premier. So my typical day, well, I'm out on site 3 to 4 days, about 3 days a week. So sometimes I've got to set out early. That's how my day starts. And the days that I'm working from home, I try and log in a little bit like before 9, just to kind of, you know, go through the traffic. And by the time 9 o'clock hits, because all the reactive stuff starts happening. So emails, the usual, checking for emergencies and speaking with the team to see if they're okay. Just try and tick off my to-do list, which, yeah, that's a questionable piece. Some days I tick it off,
I'm
some
not
days I don't and carry forward. Yeah, and
absolutely.
I'm sure it's the same with a lot of us. Trying to get, if there's any deadlines for reporting for clients, we have a lot of those. So try and get together with like our accounts team and other members of the company to just try and collect that. Um, Phone calls with customers, ad hoc. Yeah, it's very,
Yeah.
yeah, it's never a typical day. So yes.
No, there is no
Yeah.
it was um, and how about the developments that you mentioned? Are they
Mhm.
a new build or just in development and you oversee that, or they have been
Mix of
developed
both, a
in
mix of all.
right?
So I have one of the sites I have has been, I think the oldest one I probably have is probably easy to say, probably about 4 to 5 years built in. So it's kind of said, started its sort of capital expenditure process and everything like that. That's one of the largest schemes I have, about approximately 900 units, 1,000 units, in Croydon. And then I've got taken on a brand new one, which they've done the phase one, but they're still building. So it's still taking mobilization of certain blocks. That's in Oxford, Wallingford, pulls apart. So that's the extent. And in between, I've got some other schemes that are sort of brand new, or yeah, a couple of years after build. So yeah.
Amazing. And what takes time, like most of your time in when you are, for example, in the office and
Mhm.
admin accounts, meetings?
I want to say meetings because in my most recent one that I've left in Daniel Watney, I mean, my days were just filled with meetings, planned, unplanned, and everything in between. Here at Premier, I've managed to sort of try and schedule meetings as sparsely as possible, but you still get drawn in. So I think I've been spending a lot of time, as it's obviously quite new. I've been spending a lot of time traveling to my sites, getting to know my buildings.
Yes, which
Um,
is very important,
that's
isn't it?
that's the most important thing. I really, really want to get to know my buildings. I mean, I've been there 2 weeks and I think I've visited every site at least 2 to 3 times. So I've spent a lot of time traveling. Yeah, getting to know the staff, becoming a face in front of the residents, meeting the client, meeting the, people sort of partly still there in some of the sites on the sales and marketing suites. So just, going there, saying hello. It's just nice to get to know the asset that you manage. And that's just my style. I can't, yeah, I need to
Okay.
know every nook and corner. I need to be able to visualize it when I'm sitting behind the computer and answering a
Yeah.
question. I
And
want to
it
be able
was
to visualize my site.
yeah, and it was so difficult during COVID, right? Because we could not go out, we couldn't go
Yes.
to any sites, and it was very difficult. But it taught us how to
Yeah.
do all these online calls now. Even
Absolutely.
better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you know what? I was quite blessed during COVID. I was with R&R at that time, and they had an excellent sort of transition period from and their IT setup and everything. The whole business continuity plan, everything was there's a lot of work that went behind it and a lot I would say a massive support, a massive structure was available for all of us. So I think it was like, you know what, it's as good as it was on in the office. So that was one good thing I would say they did, one great thing that they did. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And meetings still continued
Yeah,
as
we still had
usual.
meetings, online meetings. Of course, residents were starting to sort of, or if you had client meetings, they were starting to sort of get used to. But we had all the facilities, Teams. They sent us with so much work from home kit.
Yeah.
They fully kitted us, and they had a lot of continuity processes in place as well, so we could refer back to it. And I think that's key, to
Mhm.
have good process in place for any company. And I think I can speak from experience. I was in a company where there was no processes, and I set up all the processes. And by the time I set up all the processes, they realized, well, it's a bigger fish to fry here. Maybe we can't handle it anymore. I'm not going to say no names. You know who I'm talking about. They decided to exit. So yeah. So that's yeah. So I'm a big believer in having, at least something to refer to for your team, for your people, have some processes in place. Of course, it's not written in stone. It can be, interchangeable, it's constantly adapting, but you need to have a framework.
Absolutely. Processes are very important. And I I've worked on my own for majority of my career, I would say, probably.
Yeah.
Creating these processes and initially remembering everything and not having any processes, and then
Yeah.
realizing that you need processes, to continue.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
is it is extremely important. And currently
Yeah. Absolutely.
we are updating and upgrading and implementing everything possible just to make the day and all the projects easier, because otherwise, yeah, you just get lost in the process. um, okay, so how about you think of a story from any of your previous jobs, because obviously you've been in this current role very recently, but anything from before that comes to your mind, something that you want to share with us, and someone who will be listening to this podcast can learn about.
Okay, any story? Let's have a think. There are so many stories.
Yeah.
Do you know
Well,
what? I'd like to. This might not come up for everybody, but some property managers may experience this. So maybe it's a good story to share. It's a niche one. So it's about taking a leaseholder taking the freeholder to the FTT, for example. Yeah, over reasonableness of cost. So a particular building, mansion block, actually it was a period, no, it was a period conversion, 4 or 5 flats, so very small sort of, building as such. Obviously, they were trying to get some major works carried out for the external redex, and it was going on for many, many years. The notices got issued, then the tenders got done, then one of the leaseholders, who was the most vocal leaseholder in the group, who actually took the landlord to FTT, employed their own surveyor to actually scrutinize the scope of works that the surveyor appointed by the landlord did. And each time she would, object or, raise queries. And by the time her queries came back and been answered, the tenders would expire. So the costs would keep going up. So I think there was like 3 notices, and this was prior to my time. But by the time I came and joined this company, I kind of caught the tail end of it. We were in a situation where they were like, well, the costs have gone up, justified, da 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 da, which we did. We had in-house surveyors, so there was a surveying department within the company who was doing the surveying work, who was doing the project management. Some clients or some leaseholders will say that's conflict of interest, but that was the nature of that business. They offered that service. The landlord was happy to go ahead with it, so it was done in a fair way. Selection in terms of the surveying team. It then turned out that, okay, we managed to get some of the funding, from the leaseholders, because the works couldn't commence until the funds were available, or the contract could not be awarded. There was a bit of a deficit, which the landlord, in the end, we convinced. So I was kind of head of the department in that company. So it was my property manager who was dealing with this. So we sat endlessly. We tried to figure out, what's the strategy here? What can we do? The works are not going to go ahead if we don't have the funds. So obviously the next resolution or the next step would be to reach out to the landlord to forward fund. Bear in mind, this landlord is not a company. They are an individual. So sometimes, it's not easy for them to fork out £50,000 worth of deficit. But anyway, they agreed to, which was good. So yeah, we could award the contract. We've got the date of starting date and everything. And just at the midst of that, the leaseholder took the landlord to FTT over reasonableness of cost. When we were in that process and the landlord decided to, then select a solicitor to represent him, what he didn't do, and again, there's an asset management company within this department within this company that deals with the landlord, because they have other interests as well. So very complicated structure for the company itself. So that's why don't think many people will face this necessarily. But the advice that was given to the client, it's not something that I agreed with. I was away, and then when I came back, this was kind of in the beginning of the new year. So I was away for the first week. When I came back and I was to go represent the company on behalf of the property management team, my issue was the asset manager didn't advise the client that we need to have a barrister, on the
yeah,
day.
yeah,
And they insisted that we didn't. And I said, well, we do, because the leaseholder that's coming is a commercial solicitor. And she's going to have her daughter, who's also a commercial solicitor. Although they're
God,
commercial, but they're still legal lawyers and solicitors.
yeah,
And, I don't have a legal background. So whilst I can fight the operational case, I can't
yes,
necessarily pick out
the
legal
legal.
nuances. Anyway, so there was a massive internal conflict because of that. It turned out in the end that we did need a solicitor. Luckily, the judges of the FTT, they are usually they're usually not judges. They're sort of group of like surveyors or professionals in the industry that represent as the sort of the people that make the decision. They found something within the clause of the lease about the portionability, payability. There was an issue with it, so they then deferred that to say, well, we can't make a decision. Luckily, so you see, there was legal issues. So all along, I stood my ground and I said, no, we need to have a solicitor. Oh, it's too late now. We can't appoint. It's going to cost $3,000 to get married. So I said, well, $3,000 for a 50,000 case, I would do that. So
Yes, absolutely.
that's a funny story I thought I could share. And the what's the word? The sort of kind of issues that you'll come up with and challenges that you come up with internally. So I wanted to highlight that internal challenge sometimes that we face within the company. So I think it's very important for a company to be supportive and have that knowledge. So what happened here is the departments that I'm referring to, they didn't necessarily understand how it works because they're very commercial, and they didn't necessarily take on board what we were saying. So yeah.
I see. I see. And because obviously we're not legally trained, right? We're not solicitors in any sort of and the
Luckily, I
knowledge
had
will be
some.
very
Absolutely, and luckily, I have some very good industry friends, solicitor friends, who I was able to pick up the phone to. But that's not how you do things. If this was not me and my property manager, and the only reason I was there is because my property manager was on leave. So if this was my property manager at attending the FTT, um, the experience that she has, or is not necessarily, and it's not a bad thing. Everybody starts at a certain point, and her
yeah.
experience was probably 3 years in the industry, so she wouldn't know how to navigate. So that's where I felt that, and then later on I had a massive internal board meeting, and I brought it to the attention of the partners, and I did show them that, look, you have to allow the professionals to do the professional job. You have to allow to listen to your heads of departments. You can't just then say, oh, because the asset manager is trying to save $3,000 for the client, but they're not understanding, well, you've got 50
Yeah.
grand at stake. That
And you
doesn't make,
can't
that's
just
not in a
send your
commercial
property.
sense.
Yeah. And
You
you
can't
can't
send your
just send
property
your
manager without a solicitor to a
yeah.
FTT. It doesn't matter if it's just, oh, it's just to do with feasibility of costs. Well, it doesn't matter. It's still a case. There can
It's
still be
never
a massive
just.
liability.
Yeah, exactly. It's never just, isn't it? But that is a great example that yes, as you said, maybe not everyone will come across, but there will be cases similar that at least
Yeah.
a property manager can go to a leadership and say, I'm not going.
Exactly. I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is sometimes it's to know when to say, it's to know when to say no, or it's to know when to say, you know what, this is beyond my capacity, and my remit. So sometimes I think that's not to be afraid of saying that, because sometimes it's leadership doesn't always understand, or they are not necessarily looking at it on a granular level. They're probably just looking at it from cost saving purpose, or they're like, oh, that's fine. So it's down to the property managers to communicate what the shortcomings are,
Yes.
to then
Yeah.
be able to get what they need to accomplish that task.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not always the case that we know everything, right? Even if it's property
Exactly.
management, operational, there are so many avenues where you will be, well, I actually don't know. I never came across this before, so I need help.
And there's no harm saying that, because you cannot practically be able to come across every single situation.
No,
It's
exactly. The
not
reason.
it's not how it's not how many situations you've been a part of, it's how you deal with it. It's your, the skills kind of comes from more of the fact that, what analytical or analysis you're doing, where you're finding the gaps, and how are you then, finding the resources to meet those gaps. And I think that's what our job is as property managers. We are master of all, um, or jack of all trades, master of none, aren't
Yeah,
we?
yeah,
So so our job is to bring together all the expertise and facilitate that process. So I think to say that this is beyond my remit and actually I need help is actually the best thing you can do for your mental health.
Absolutely, which I think we appreciate more and more than ever because we are overloaded with work. How do you prioritize managing multiple properties, and how do you prioritize tasks when you're managing multiple properties?
Sometimes I just wing it. No, I'm only joking. Can't wing it. After a while, you kind of, it just becomes like you no longer need to write things down, I find. But I'll tell you, all jokes aside, I think prioritizing is key. It's absolutely the most important. Yeah. So I think what I used to do and to be honest, I still sometimes do this. And I'm saying I don't write it down, but it's there in my head, how to prioritize. So I tend to use this method: tasks that you do, tasks that you plan, tasks that you
Mhm.
delegate, and tasks that you delete. So you
Okay.
base that on the basis of urgency and importance. So
Yes.
something that's urgent and important is something that goes onto your to-do list, like you're doing that task. And you have to keep that manageable. You can't put 10 things in there. It's got to be something that's either a deadline for that day, like client reporting, health and safety. Obviously, if there's a bloody fire or a flood, any emergencies, anything like a complaint that's time constrained, or in a high level complaint, anything that is urgent and important goes into that first sort of, today's task list.
Yeah.
Anything
Yeah.
else that's important but not urgent, you can
Mm.
start planning, putting them in your planning list. So then those anything from the planned list becomes your urgent list for the next day and so forth. But there are also things that sometimes we get thrown at us by our managers, maybe our clients. They try to manage our calendars or diaries. And what do you do then?
Yes.
You're like, oh my God, I've got to get this done as well. Okay, try and see. So that's urgent, but it's not important. But that's in my delegate list. Everything is priority. But I think delegation is a tool that must be used, because you have support teams. So you have like your coordinators, you have your site team, you have your estate managers. There are so many things that you can actually delegate. And it doesn't mean that you're not doing your job, you're giving your job to somebody else. No, you're actually finding what skill set that task requires, and you're finding the person right within your team or your support team. So your extended departments that can also support you. Um, if you don't have that, you can find support within your team. You can find support within your site team. I think we'd fail to utilize our site staff. And sometimes I feel that as property managers, oh, let them do their thing, otherwise their task is going to come on to us. No, it's about building that rapport and actually saying that, you know what, I don't know, whatever, Tom, this is something that you can actually get done on site. It's something to do with the site work. It's something to do with something on site. Yeah, okay. Give me the report at the end of it, but the client needs it. Get them to start doing that so they can build their confidence. The client can have more channels. Obviously, you agree a reporting pattern, and you can have ad hoc reporting if necessary, which clients are not necessarily against that. It's a matter of getting the information across in a timely manner and addressing the issue in a timely manner. So I think delegation is a tool that's very less used. So I think that helps me a lot to get through my priorities, because delegation is something that is an urgent task that you can't actually do it. And then you have the delete, something that's not
Yeah.
important and it's not urgent. So stop adding things into your list that you actually is not going to serve any purpose, because
Yeah.
um and push it down that delete list a little bit. But I guess you can't really delete things. I mean, I'm just thinking about maybe, I don't know, reminders
But
from a
it's been
system
there,
or something like that. Yeah.
and it's been there for 2 weeks, and you are like, okay, it's time to look at this email.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the kind of method I tend to use. Another way to call it is should be, could be, and must be. So anything that you must do, get it done now. Anything that you should do, you can wait till tomorrow or wait till, a couple of days. And something that you could do could probably be lower down your list of priorities. But as the days go by, those things obviously change, those numbers can change. But yeah, that helps me a lot.
Exactly. But you also have, like, every day there is the urgent tasks that they
Absolutely.
just come in, right? And you can't control them.
You have to have
So
space
these
for
are
that, and that's
very
where
Yep.
and that's where you have to have that. That's why I've said you can't have 10 things that you're doing that day, because if you're doing 10 things that day, you can't get anything else done. So your priorities should, in my experience, should range from 3 to 5 items for that day, because everything else around that, you have stuff coming in that day that you have to pick up or plan or delegate or even, work through or understand. You might have site visits, you might have to pick up the phone, speak to a resident. That could take a 10-minute call, can become an hour. The other thing I think as well is what I tend to do is I tend to avoid reactive ad hoc calls as much as possible. So if there is one such like that, I try to then plan it into a Teams call or a call within a window and say, right, here, this is my availability. Of course, you're not going to not pick up a phone call, but if the call is, you understand it very in the first couple of seconds, the urgency and the extent of how long that can go, you offer a meeting based on your availability in your calendar. You have to plan. Otherwise you're going to be reactively, you're not going to be proactive. You're going to be constantly reactive, and then you're going to
In
miss
the
your other tasks.
in the ideal world,
In
yes.
an ideal world.
But
Well,
very often
this is
you
what
get a
works. Yeah. 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 No, I absolutely agree. As I said, you can't always do it, but with taking on the new role, and I think that's the approach I've kept in. There are emails, and you know what, residents I've noticed here are quite understanding. They're like, oh, you're new, I'm not going to bombard you, but these are the issues. So, and I've said, you know what, it'll be good to have a call, so let's just jump on a call. I'm somebody that loves to jump on a Teams meeting and just have that personal touch rather than emails initially. If there's a lot of heat, try and avoid just back and forth emails. And I love to
yeah.
jump on a
And
Teams, half an hour, 15 minutes Teams call. At least they get to see you. They
yeah.
get to see you as a person or meet them on site.
And manage communications well with the residents this way, because it's easier to just jump on a call, go through it, 10 minutes and done. And then you know what you need to do and they know what to expect.
Absolutely. Do you know how many times I've had people that didn't understand their account statements, and you explain them, break it down in an email, color code it, bold it, underline it, they still don't get it. So after trying, I think I did a couple of those a few years ago. This is going back a long time, maybe 6-7 years. And I said, you know what, this is just not working. I'm spending 20 minutes writing one email, and then I've got flurry of emails back saying, oh, what about this? What about that? I'm just like, have you not? It's there. It's there. It's like you rather talk with the person on real time than back and
Yeah.
forth emails. And I think, and I said, you know what? Forget this approach. Mr. X, are
Yeah.
you available for a Teams call? We'll share our screen and do this. When can I see you I'm on site this such and such day. Can I see you then? Quickly went through, and jobs are good in. So I think for me, that personal touch is it works wonders. And I think it allows my personality and my authenticity to come through as well. So I think sometimes winning, people love people. People can win people over. It's your personality that wins, at the end of the day. When you're behind a screen and you're behind emails, it's always misconstrued.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I feel I feel because you are in bigger developments and I'm the opposite, and I feel that the expectations are very different, so the experience is also different. But yeah, they will be the challenges with bigger developments as well, isn't it?
I'll tell you what, in my last role, all we had, the biggest development that we had was maybe 70 units. So it was small, tiny buildings with nagging, is the only word I can use, people who didn't understand at all. Whereas in developments, well, like you said, there's another set of challenges with developments, because people think they know everything there. That's another worse kettle of fish. They think they know it all, and it's really unlearning their knowledge and relearning their knowledge. But I mean, I say large and complex, but there are, I have also had roles where I used to manage smaller units in Folkestone when I lived in Ashford at the starting of my career. You'll meet, there's that one particular resident in a 4 units building that is constantly emailing you 10 times a day. There's a tap which
And
is not
still
even in the building. It's running. Well, it's
yeah.
our fault. Stuff like that. And they have different level of expectations. I totally agree. And I think it gets really busy on a small, medium portfolio. It can get extremely, extremely busy. And you know what? Again, I think,
Peter,
yeah, I agree. I mean, again, down in Watney, that's kind of clientele we had. I did retain a few of the buildings myself as well. We had some complex issues. And again, my approach there was flood them with communication. We used to have a system that we sort of like an online communication system, Dwellin, which is quite popular
mm,
anyway. So don't know if you guys use that as
yep.
well. Yeah. So we just, I changed. Well, again, like I said, there was no processes in place. One of the processes that we put in place was, regular communication. So rather than you spending, and I would tell my team, and it was difficult sometimes for me to change the way they worked because they were used to like be reactive and send a million emails. And I would say to them,
Mm,
collate all the issues you have, maybe there's 4 or 5, and send out weekly updates. And you will see that how your email, no, it won't, da, 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 da. And they started doing it. And yes, it went down. Plus, the
yeah.
directors, and I had a similar one in one Disney, the place was called, and share of freeholds, all directors. Actually, there was 70% or 80% directors, but then you had very involved residents who were not directors, but were actually advising the directors.
Mm,
So I had a resident, I had this random resident, oh no, we take all advice from him, blah, blah, blah. Okay, no problem at all. Met them
wow.
on site, set up these monthly or weekly update stuff. And honestly, they completely backed off because we were able to then keep that momentum up. Because if you think about it, in a smaller building, you will have certain issues that are very consistent.
Yeah.
And if you've got
Yeah.
your planned maintenances in place, you've got your PPMs in place, and those reportings are happening fine. You've got your compliance reporting in place, you've got your processes in place, and you've got your communications in place. You're able to then tackle that reactive, you're able to get that reactive element out. And that's what I introduced in a lot of these buildings, and it started working. But it was a massive big feat, I'd say, because it was changing the property manager's attitude. They didn't want to do it. They thought that was an additional task they were taking on, and not understanding actually it's not an additional task. It's actually you're going to reduce 50%, well, not 50%, but 20% of your email count.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, empathetically, confidentially, and educating. It's almost like educating people, isn't it? It's saying to them, okay, that's a crack on the wall. It looks like, it's to us, it doesn't seem like a structural damage. It could just be a movement of the building. Why don't you
Yeah.
monitor it and see if the crack increases? If it increases exponentially, let us know and we'll send a structural engineer out. If not, this is something that we'll address. And this is something that's a movement of the building. It's just what it is, what it is. So it's just a matter of just communicating, well, educating rather. And then you have those that will say, you don't know what you're talking about, you're rubbish, and I'm going to report you to the landlord. Feel free to, as long as you have your, content there, what you've done. It's just about communicating to them and telling them, yeah, this is the plan. We'll look at it the next. I have in this one building where in the last row where couple of ones are retained and the windows were demised. And unfortunately, there were issues with the windows. And we said, you know what, as a part of the X-Dex, we can look at that. And we'll look at that at the next year, in the summer. And they'll be like, oh, well, it's, well, okay, we send a surveyor out, we can look at a condition survey for that window, but ultimately it's your responsibility. So, but actually the glass inside is our responsibility. The frame is not. And it's all of those dual party responsibility comes into play. And you're like, okay, that's fine. We'll have a look at it, but we can't because we haven't got the budget at the moment and we're planning it for the next year's decks. So yeah. So I think those are kind of, I would agree, are challenging things, because then you're like, oh, you don't want that to deteriorate, and you don't want leaks to start happening. Then the building insurance will start getting claimed on, and that will go up, and it's a whole list of repercussions
And
that come from it. So
again, it's about the communication and expectations, because
yeah,
we as property managers kind of get, a lot of emails or calls on certain, let's say, the situation you mentioned. But if we send a communication to all leaseholders and list why we're doing, why we're advising on this, and what will be the outcome, and why doing it at
yeah,
once, saving money as well. There's just so many reasons. And then if they can't, agree on this, there is nothing you can do,
there's
but
nothing you can
just
do.
yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly.
And that's where I think, quarterly newsletters are very good to have. You can, I remember a building I had taken on, one of my roles in R&R at the time when I was a property manager there. It was a iconic site, 300 units, but gosh, when I had taken it on, there were so many things that, I mean, it was very, very unhappy set of residents. You had social housing resident association, you
Right,
had
yeah,
private resident association. They were all unrecognized. Then you had the estate as well, and there was an issue with the gates. The exit gates were, um, one of the gates, you needed planning. Basically, they needed planning to do any repairs to it. The other gate didn't need planning, so it was that level of, part of it was all, sort of within the planning constraints, and part of it wasn't, and there were stone buildings, and it was an absolute nightmare. I think
yeah,
I started just visiting the site a lot. I started having meetings, and there were like garden committees. There was so many different little groups of residents involved. By the
mhm,
time I finished with it, they all dissipated. There we only had the liaison group from LNQ housing,
yeah,
and the resident group, because it was like, I think there was like 10 or 12 blocks. Each block had their resident groups. Basically, each block had
yeah,
their representatives. By the time I finished with them, I think maybe 2 years later, we had fixed the gates. The resident groups were like, we don't need to have these resident groups anymore because everything is going fine. The estate manager we had, or the building manager, he was there for like since the development was built, so he had the historic knowledge of it. So I
yeah.
made sure that I increased his wages, because his wages hadn't been increased for about 5 years.
Wow.
And the notes from previous property managers were, oh, the residents won't pay the increase. But you just optimize the budget. You work around the budget, and you always increase your salary for your staff members. You give them bonus.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we managed to do it. It was all agreed. And so the thing, that the kind of tactics I used there was quarterly newsletters, ad hoc, get the garden committee on board and ask them, change the gardening contract. And that was one of the biggest issue, because the grounds were massive. So you had I think, is the Blackheath Football Club was in that development. It was massive. So you had a lot of, grounds maintenance issues.
Yeah,
So I think I went through two different contracts there. There wasn't that many plants and stuff, but I think I had a little bit of plants in some of the
yeah,
buildings. So just rearranging the contracts, making sure that you're keep managing those contracts properly, you're optimizing the budget. We managed to save some money. We managed to even have a capex plan introduced. So thing. You don't want to be a phone call behind, or an email behind a screen that they don't know, that they can't relate to. They know you in person, they know you by face. It becomes so much easier. Yeah, you have an initial brunch to take. You take that, and then they become your best friends. They start talking about their dog and their everybody else to you. So they even
yeah.
invite you over for a cup of tea. So I think building that rapport is extremely important. I think it kills so many birds. It does. It's setting that, like you said, that communication and managing expectations, key. They're key, absolutely.
Absolutely. And like I mentioned, that the systems we use nowadays are absolutely great and
Yeah.
the give us that opportunity. Do you remember the days, the back in the days when we had to email everyone
email,
individually,
BCC,
GDPR.
BCC, blind copy,
Yeah, yeah.
blind copy in the. But I absolutely agree. Our systems nowadays are so, it's amazing. I think you can tailor make the community, the group that you want to send it out to. You can create different groups. You can send it to everybody. You can separate the residents out to the leaseholders. I mean, it's excellent. I think we have to use the power of AI is excellent at the moment. I think we need all of that because the level of busyness that's there, you need that extra support.
I
You need
absolutely
to
agree.
use, yeah, you need to use those things. Talking about AI, is it Anna, your AI bot for your company? What's her name again? That's such an amazing
Lily,
initiative. Honestly, Lily, that's it. It's Lily. Oh my God, that's amazing. That's brilliant. Has that
she's
helped?
on the train.
Would you say?
It does. She's on WhatsApp used as well. All the emails that come, and she kind of sorts them out as issue, urgent, report,
Wow.
invoice. And if obviously someone calls and if we're not picking up the phone, yeah, she kind of there are obviously a lot of things that she's not available to and not having the knowledge that a human would. Like the testing. The testing of it when I posted it on LinkedIn was interesting because there were a lot of people that called and the questions that they asked, some were funny. But yeah, she will not, she's trained not to discuss personal information, not to share personal information. So these are the first important things, but definitely improving. And at least when we are there, because she can also report the issue directly to the software we use, and then it just pops up on an email. So this is great, but it takes a lot of time, a lot of training, like a property manager,
Yeah.
whether she's able or
Yeah.
not, she needs the training. So technology is here
Absolutely.
to help us, in my opinion. So
Well, that's brilliant. And I think that's so, so good. It just helps that front line, that it's that triaging, the frontline triaging that we call, you know,
yeah,
like when you go into an A&E, you get triaged before you get sent to the specialists. So I think that triaging is excellent. Yeah. Yeah.
what advice would you give to someone starting in the industry, wanting to learn
It's
about the
so
industry?
different now, isn't it? It's so different to when we started. I mean, um, I would say if you're somebody that can be jack of all trades, master of none, but you have to be, and all jokes aside, you have to be you have to be a master of all. I'd say you have to be a bloody accountant, you have to be a handyman, you have to be an insurance specialist, you have to be somebody's shrink. You have to have that,
Yes,
the
all of that.
ability to handle all of that. When they say, oh, you're offloading, if your friend, you're offloading too much on me, I need space. You can't be somebody like that. You have to be able to take it on and sift out everything and be able to come up with a concise solution. If you're somebody who has a knack for that, and somebody who is in love with buildings, like, I love to go check out my sites. I love to spend time there with my bricks and mortars and, get to know the
Yeah,
plants, get to know the technical aspect of things. So if you've got but I'm not going to say I'm not somebody that will get a tool kit out and start, fixing things, but I like to know the science behind it, so it's kind of like that. um like, I remember early part of my career, I would actually, I started off in lettings management before I moved into block management 5 years later. And in lettings management, I would, like, go with the contractors and see what they're doing to fix something. If they're up on the roof, I'm up on the roof with them.
yeah,
I just wanted to love to just get to know what it is, because it's about keeping yourself, having the knowledge so you don't get fooled, number one.
yeah. Hmm.
But you can't know everything, so it's about having that personality of, okay, you're overarchingly, you have the knowledge, you can't be fooled, you don't get intimidated by people, but at the same time you're not intimidating others. So I think been something that has worked for me, is having a humble, authentic personality, uh, keen learner. Like I said, even now, I consider myself as not, I would never consider myself as an expert, because you can never be an expert. There's so many different facets that unfolds. Um, you might be at level 1, I'm at level 3, but I'm still learning. It's that, whatever level you are at, you're always learning. So
Forever
a
learning.
forever learner, a constant student, somebody who, I would say that it's very important to keep up with your CPD, constantly reading up on the industry knowledge. There's so much, it's such a dynamic industry that there's so much happening at a consistent level. Just keeping up with, the changes, and somebody who has empathy, because you're dealing with people and their
And their
homes.
home.
So having an empathetic personality is a very important. Yeah,
I think you mentioned the going out to sites and meet contractors. That is something that I did, and it helped me massively
massively.
with learning. Yeah,
I think that is a very unsung hero element of our role. I think it's absolutely key. Even if you have a site manager, FM, whatever, you want to get to know your contractors. You want to get to know your contractor lead. You want to have that first KPI meeting. You want to actually let them know that, hey, I'm not just a name. I'm very, very active. I have a good hold on my property. So if you're not going to be doing a good job, you're replaceable. If you're going to be pulling the wool over my eyes, you're replaceable. And I know contractors have a lot of issues about, oh, we don't get paid on time and this, that, and the other. But I think that's where you manage that relationship is so important for your property manager to know which contractors they're employing. And when you have that personal relationship, you'll see they will be available for you. They will extend that payment term dates, and if you
yeah,
need somebody at the beck and call, they'll come. So I think that's so, so, so important. But also they get to see how much you know, because sometimes they're like, oh, she doesn't know anything. Oh, this property manager, they don't know nothing. We can just do what we want to do. But when you're having meetings with them and you're having performance meetings with them, you're questioning them on stuff, they then realize, oh no, we can't be, we got to keep it absolutely, transparent.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, totally. I think this
Yeah,
is a great advice because it is a very first hand of learning how to do things, and sometimes, yes, as you said, you have the managers above you, but everyone is tackling with their inbox and so on. So
yeah,
it is difficult. It
100%.
is yeah, and it is difficult to be everywhere. And when you have an apprentice or
Exactly.
a new startup, they have so many questions because they don't know, right? I was
Exactly.
told once it's a common sense job, but it is not.
It's not a common sense job, absolutely. I mean, well, I don't think so. I don't think it's common sense at all. And I think it's about planting your eyes and ears, is what I say. So when you have good relationship with your contractors, they are your eyes and ears on site. You have good relation, and if it's a site without site team. So for example, one of my sites here at Premier, which is the one I spoke to you about in Oxford, there's no site team on that. So it's just me. So, and it's a huge estate. It's quite big, probably 300-400 units, but there's no site team yet because we're still at initial phases. So how am I going to? It takes me 3 hours to get to Oxford, 3 hours back. So I can't be there every day. So what will be my
No.
strategy? Getting to know the site, getting to know every little, okay, here's where the blocks are located, having my site map, knowing it, being able to visualize it, and knowing what PPMs I've got in place. What assets do I have on that site? So I've got a massive playground. That's one of my assets. I don't have any, they're not high rises, so there are no man safe system on the buildings, for example. So it's knowing what are your true assets. Okay, there's dry riser, there's no wet riser, there's no smoke fire alarm system, for example. So not every site's going to have every single asset. So when you know what assets are there on your site, you then know which contractors are maintaining those, and just having that relationship with the contractors to ensure that your compliance is up to date. They're visiting and you're getting the reports. If you're not getting the reports, and then you arrange a monthly site meeting with them when you're on site to do your site visit. Or, if it's not a massive big site, maybe you can do it quarterly um, if it's not massive, if it's a small area, or, you've got a couple of assets. So it's just that just setting that
Yeah.
initial expectation, and actually knowing what your site includes. I think that's another thing as well I would advise, is knowing what assets you have on site. So that's very important. Even in a small site, sometimes like, oh, well, there's like 10 fire extinguishers. Well, no, there's none. It might come up on a report, and it's like that. It's like, but if there is 10 fire extinguishers, are they in date? It's that. So it's knowing what's there, knowing where your
Yeah.
intake cupboards
And
are,
I will
knowing where the
and I
stopcocks
will
are.
just yeah. And I will just add, take a lot of photos. Take a lot of
Take a
photos
lot
when you
of
go to site.
photos. Yes.
Yes. Take a lot of photos and videos, because you just don't know when you're gonna need one, to look at the corner of that. And it's very important as well. I take a lot of photos. So
100%. Absolutely. Yes.
amazing. Priya, it has been pleasure talking to you. You've given amazing insights of property management, and I hope I will see you soon. And I hope that you will visit us again and be my guest again.
Oh, it'll be a pleasure. Absolutely. It'll be an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It was really nice to see you, your beautiful face, and it's such a great initiative. I'm so happy for you, and I would love
Thank
to be a
you.
part of it again.